So I'll do what I did last week and just record the call and share the link later on, and people can post it wherever they see fit.
Sharif, do you want to chase up Thomas Cox if he's not already on? I don't see him.
Yeah, maybe a sec. See if I can track him down.
Hey everyone.
Howdy doodly do.
Morning, everybody.
Hey Kevin. Nice picture, Daniel.
Hey, how you doing?
Good morning.
Hey Mini.
Okay, I'm pinging Thomas Cox, but I think we could probably kick off and he'll join if he's coming. A couple of minutes late. I think we've got a good representation of everybody. Thanks for joining. So we had a call last week, obviously. We've got 3 new agenda items today to get people's kind of feel on the RAM market. We're supposed to have an update from Thomas on the Alliance. David's going to talk about the Constitution referendum and proposal 42 put out there on what is valid and what wouldn't need a public vote, as it were. And I think we have Bart from Block.One, so for an update from them. I suppose just to throw it out there, what do people think about the RAM market? Is it a solved problem? Is it something we don't need to worry about again? Or do they see, as demand for dApps kind of increase, it's something that we should be vigilant on? I just want to get kind of a general feel for.
Does anyone have just a chart of RAM price over time to throw on the screen for everybody, like over the past, I don't know, 3 months or so? Nope. All right.
Where would I get that?
Here, I'll throw a link in chat.
Is someone from EOS 42 on? Because Andrew Coots built that site. It's like buyeosram.com or.
Yeah. You're talking about Andrew's site. Sorry, what is it you need?
The RAM chart over time. Price.
Oh. Just hold on, I'm not sure if I've got it to hand, but hold on.
Sharif, is there any way you can turn off the music in your area?
That's a 3-month view. Does that work?
Thank you very much. So I think the 3-month view is very helpful, and I think going back even further, you start to see really huge, a really huge gap between the current price and what it was. Does anyone remember the date at which we implemented the 1 kilobyte per block?
I don't have that by memory.
Or has any, obviously CPU issues have been very loudly trumpeted in the community. I don't know if because of that, personally, I haven't seen anybody complain about the price of RAM or cite it as a reason to delay development or deployment. It's been about CPU issues, really. But has anyone else heard anything?
So Ben did bring it up, as he proposed 6 points that has been raised to him that are stopping DApps from mainstream adoption of EOS. And RAM was one of the RAM volatility was one of the points that he made.
Volatility or price and account
Volatility.
creation?
I think it was volatility. So
That graph is pretty non-volatile over the past recent bit.
What's interesting about hearing feedback like that is the way in which information about the RAM market or controversies for ECAP or whatever it is, trickles out over time and then persists in being cited in mainstream media publications. So it's helpful to understand the source of information, because they may be seeing reports based on old info, because these things get cited over and over in these articles.
Okay, we're all here. Does anyone want to push that? Is Ben near if he wants to defend that? Because it's an all-time low right now. So the price, do you want to go further? Do you want to increase the blocks, the RAM increase per block? What's that hand here?
Eugene here. I see more issues recently with CPUs and RAM, to be honest.
should we talk about that for a minute? Because I know that there's a proposal out there. What's the current feel on that proposal? Is it something that will get passed?
The increase from 20% to 30% target?
Yeah, that one.
Can we hear concerns for reasons why it should not be approved?
Well, the reasons GNOME gave, I think, are pretty important. So each time we're pushing that limit up is like trying to, have our car go faster and, let's say, max out to the max limit, right? Get closer to the maximum capacity that we can, the wiggle room. And that has impact for anyone replaying the chain in the future, anyone building tools around it. It's a usability issue. It's not just a question of short time performance. It has a lot of side effects.
It kind of sounds like if you got a memory leak in an application, you can just throw more memory at it and it might fix it for a while, but then it's going to kind of exacerbate it over time and it's not really a...
Right. So it's pushing the limit and is stressing the system, and you don't want to do that too much. At some point, we'll have problems with handoffs. It shortens the delays between blocks, so we'll have more problems with handoffs, and then replays become harder and harder. And this, I think, it's a problem for anyone building things on Node EOS. Any nodes in the future will be annoyed by those big blocks, and it takes a lot of time to replay. So that's I think the GNOME objection, and I stand by that too. Sorry.
Bart, do you have an opinion on this proposal?
Whom?
Art from Block.One is on.
Art.
So I don't really have an opinion on the proposal itself. This is an intentional tweakable parameter to the blockchain, and you are looking at it the right way, where it's all about how do you maintain the guarantee to the network. I do think for helping me prioritize what we can do to contribute to the CPU problem, knowing more details about when and why handoffs and things like that start getting missed as that target goes up. The concerns about the future replayability of the chain are valid, and we can mitigate that somewhat because the software a year from now should be faster than the software is now, but we can't completely erase that because it is just building up a backlog of CPU processing. But in the short term, from like a technology side, there should be fewer limitations from like a runtime perspective as to how far you can push that value up. And if we push it up to a certain value, like we saw in the test nets, and it starts to create chaos on the network, dropping things, missing handoffs and stuff like that. Knowing the nature of that problem helps us at Block.One kind of focus development resources on fixing those things, not because I expect you to put out a proposal and bump it up to 45% or 50% anytime soon, but from my side, I want you to have the capability of doing that so that you can make the judgment call based on the proper factors. And it sounds like right now it's a mixture of that long view of what it takes to replay the chain, and also some short-term technical difficulties that I think we can solve. So I don't really want to make a judgment call as to whether or not the current proposal is a good value or a bad value. That's really up to the community of block producers and the community itself. But there is, in this discussion, there is some technical points that I would like to dig into so that I can better understand them, and maybe set up some sort of laboratory environment, maybe on one of the test nets, where we can really dig into it and figure out why we're seeing those missed handoffs and things like that.
Do I understand that you're saying if we push it up a little bit, we will see the problems rise or happen so we can address them? Do I hear something like that?
I'm not suggesting we do that on the live main network. I'm suggesting we set up a laboratory environment where we can replicate the problems that we're seeing when they tried to take higher values on the test network, so that we can understand those problems and determine if they are somehow systemic problems and laws of nature type of thing, or if it's parts of the technology in the code base that we can optimize or address. So that, again, I'm more looking to give you the option to push that value higher, so that you're making the decision based on value judgment, not based on technology.
Well, I know White Block has a laboratory environment already set up for us.
Yeah, but they can only do 50 transactions per second, I think.
Come on, let's not go there. So, Bart, you said there's a few options that could be addressed. What were those things that you said we could address before trying to, what were you thinking of?
Well, in this particular context, I suspect that some amount of the problem with moving that value higher deals with propagation delay on the peer-to-peer network and validation delay, and really even you could probably blame part of it on the topology of the peer-to-peer network. And those are all parts of the technology that we at Block.One haven't really invested a whole lot into researching, as far as how that looks on a real live network, a public network. And we would have to do that in kind of partnership with the people who are operating live public networks like test nets and things like that, so that we could better understand where it's breaking down. I suspect, just based on the way it started to break down with a relatively low target percentage compared to the overall 500 millisecond span you have, that there are opportunities to optimize that propagation delay and just the kind of algorithmic complexity of getting blocks across the network, so that even with slightly larger blocks at runtime, at real time, the network can keep up and keep everyone in sync.
So that would address the handoffs issue of increasing that number, right?
I think so. I think if you're looking for like an actual artifact of these issues, we would see it with the missed handoffs. Yeah.
So the other aspect of having the replayability and the future of how people can use the chain. I don't know. Are there any other solutions that we could address? I know there are, right? If we want to increase throughput, we could try to go to side chains faster and bring about a whole new host of problems. But
yeah, the long-term replay problem. We're never going to get away from that completely. I think we always want to have the ability to replay the chain from the beginning and validate it from the first block to the last block, even years from now. So that we're building up a backlog of processing that's never going to go away for that specific use case. I do think for the average user, though, we will, using some of the technology that has been developed in the community and some of the technology we're working on in Block.One that we've released in kind of a preview fashion, we will be able to get some manner of, replay really only exists between some sort of well-known and validated snapshot and today, which that time period can only be a month, and then we'd have only a month's worth of CPU backlog to really process, or a week's worth, or whatever the frequency of those snapshots that can come out and be validated and be trusted, establish trust in them. And again, that's for the average user. We will always need the use case of being able to start from scratch and validate it completely. The other hedge is that in a year or 2 years or whatever, the software should be remarkably faster just from normal engineering practices of finding where it's slow, fixing it, iterating on our technology for just processing in real time. So if we're addressing the real time CPU issue with optimizations and better technology, that will also go back and retroactively fix, or not fix, but address some of the costs that you pay during replay. But that's the concern that I want this debate about. If I'm being, in my opinion, that's what the debate of block sizes should be about, is purely the concern of what kind of historical backlog are we creating, defined by who the real users of the network are. And one of those concerns will be someone who wants to validate it from Genesis to the head block, but most of those concerns should be about users who want to validate it hopefully from some snapshot to this, and then we'll be worried about what the actual ramp up time is for how big that snapshot gets, and then the processing backlog between snapshots that we're accruing. And if that's what this debate turns into, as far as tweaking block size parameters and things like that, then I think we will have succeeded on the technology front. Until the debate is only about those kind of concerns, like how you can create the network in a way that users are satisfied with it, and that people who use it are satisfied, stakeholders are satisfied with it, then I think we have an implicit demand for some technology improvements that basically requires identifying the problem, which is something that Block.One will struggle with to do independently, because we simply don't operate the networks. And so it would have to be a joint effort between those who do and Block.One to identify, solve.
So we'll talk about that at the end, right? So we have an agenda item about Block.One partnership, and work better together. I think that's probably enough for RAM and CPU. Thomas Cox has joined. Thomas, do you want to give us an update from the Alliance, and then we can talk about the referendum contract and where that is?
Just a second, Sheriff, sorry. Where are we at with the handoffs that are sorted with the location flag? Hasn't Michael Yeast worked on that? Do we have a sample? Because that would help in the handoff thing. Maybe the CPU could be max or increase with less risk. I think this is a quick optimization. Is that on the table somewhere?
So
no one know?
I can tell you that we're going to be doing that on the Warbly network to optimize, but it's a much easier task because the 21 are fixed. And I suggest that we do that on Warbly and then play back the results to Mainnet and see if it's something that can.
Well, is the code for that ready? It's a sorting, right? No? Okay. No one has heard of that?
We had done some
I've
pretty
heard of it, Alex,
around that, Alex, back in May. But we didn't finalize it.
Okay. Anyway, we can talk
so
about
it is something that we've looked at internal to Block.One, and I'll give you where we are now with it. What we want now as Block.One, if we were going to try to push that feature forward, first of all, we love pull requests, so someone else wants to push the feature forward, more power to them. But internally, where we are currently at is that we are trying to measure the difference in that to see if that is the kind of critical path for these handoff problems. So optimizing points around the world, or better yet, network locations, since that's not always geographic distance, is about optimizing latency. But what we're also looking at is every validating hop in between those two nodes. In our tests has been adding more significant latency than the kind of like layer 2, layer 3 network communications underneath. So what we're seeing is that the lower hanging fruit from our point of view right now, and this is something where, again, we have a limited way of getting and surfacing this information, so feedback from the community is always welcome. Working on block validation times, propagation delays on that regard is more productive, as far as like, unit of time spent on getting handoffs to be better than working on network optimizations, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, Thomas, are you on? Can you give us an update what the Alliance is up to?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's going to be most relevant for this audience that the Alliance is up to, and there are many things we're doing, the number one thing that I want to talk about is the Constitution dialogue process. We're in week 12, I believe, right now, of ongoing weekly group phone calls in English and in Chinese and in Korean. So it's 3 calls a week every week that we then summarize and then translate the summaries back and forth across the languages. And what we've been asking people in the community who are just interested in self-select in to do is look at the various constitutional drafts that have been created. I think we're up to 5 or 6 right now. And to look at the challenges we're facing as a community and come up with language to solve those challenges that ought to be in a constitution, so that when a referendum is possible, we can have some choices to put in front of the token holders regarding, hey, here are 2 or 3 constitutions that might maybe solve our community problems or take us to the next level. What do you want? And now that we're in kind of the home stretch on constitution writing, and we're getting ready to start merging these multiple drafts into a smaller number of drafts, we're facing 2 or 3 other project modules, if you will, challenges. One is specifically how do you put something in front of voters to vote on? And the referendum code from EOS Canada, EOS Nation, and all the other contributors, thank them all very, very much. That referendum code is looking like it's, I believe, in beta now, and that's what we'll be using as a community to then vote on these constitution ideas. The other piece of work beyond that is how do you actually phrase things? How do you present things on a screen to people so they understand what their choice is? And it has to do with ballot design. And we've created a ballot crafting work group to puzzle that out and come up with some guidance and some standards so that anybody can write an initiative and it'll look like the other initiatives in terms of structure, so that you'll as a voter, you'll understand what the heck you're being offered. And you'll be able to make sense of the question posed to you so that your answer becomes meaningful. So number 1, coming up with constitutions. Number 2, coming up with a way to vote. Number 3, coming up with a way to pose questions through ballot design. Those are 3. I think there's a 4th one that's slipping my mind. And then, of course, there's getting out the vote. How do we communicate? How do we even find token holders to tell them that there's something to be voted on? How do we tally things? Oh, the other thing, right? Voting portals. The folks who designed the referendum, I thought, did a genius job of not overstepping their bounds and not trying to create new policy. When in order to not create policy, what they had to do was basically let anybody, anytime, pose any question. There's no barrier to entry for the ballot, which is dangerous as fuck, pardon my language. But you can't create a barrier without setting policy, and we don't have the authority to do that. Only token holders can do that. So how do you go from a wild west of every idiot can put in 20 questions and now there's thousands of questions on the ballot, no one wants to look at it? How you go from there is a sort of order or structure. And we believe the answer to that is through the voting portals, that each portal can offer the voter one or more filters. Say, hey, would you like to see the most popular votes first, or the most well-crafted votes first, or the ones that have the most support from other voters for you to look at? So the ballot craft group is going to come up with a way to score how well-formed a question is, and then you'll only have to look at the questions that are well-formed if that's all you want to look at as a voter.
Thomas, what's your feel for how far away are we from having our first proposal for a referendum?
Well, the first proposals are actually going to be 7-day long advisory votes that we need to clarify how to focus our writing work on Constitution offerings. It's not possible to write complete constitutions for every possible version of, do we want base layer arbitration, yes or no, or advisory level, what about this, what about that, and to write a complete constitution for each flavor that they might want. So we're going to ask over a 7-day period, maybe 3 to 5 advisory questions of the token holders using the existing referendum contract that's been
and
beta.
I presume in beta we don't need to get 15% for these
Correct.
short
Right.
posters, right?
We're just asking advice, so it's not binding. Therefore, it doesn't have to get 15% turnout. Doesn't have to be a 120-day window. None of those rules apply. And we're going to use that to speed up and kind of prune down the decision tree, and that'll speed up the writing work. So that'll actually be the first thing we'll put out that we think is going to be, meaningful from a governor's perspective. It'll be non-binding but very informative voting questions on. It's not quite a Brexit referendum, but it's kind of like that in terms of what direction we go in.
And also a first test for the experience, right? We want to sort out the experience too. It's new.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really looking forward to that. And then soon after that, we hope to have the Constitution squared away so that we can put them on a ballot probably a few months after that. Maybe before the end of the year, we can start voting on a Constitution. But in terms of meaningful votes, as soon as beta's settled in and we see, good voting portals, I'm hoping to release those advisory questions to the token holders. Maybe in the next 2 weeks.
I know we have Josh and Daniel from that referendum group. Would one of you guys just want to give us a quick update of where people can go and beta test and where we are with that?
Or Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, it's looking very good. We're very happy with the smart contract that EOS Canada put together. That's, we're good to go. We have Tally is working as expected, and we have 5 different UIs that token holders can choose to interact with. It's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. We're getting more and more UIs every day. So we've been working ourselves on a voting portal called eosvotes.io that's designed to be both an educational portal as well as a place where token holders can come to vote. Very simple, just dedicated to voting. We're putting some finishing touches on the educational pieces there, but everything else works. GrayMass supports voting, Blocks.io, EOS Toolkit, My EOS Kit, EOS Authority, and there's eosforum.org. Anything you wanted to add?
Basically, expect today we're going to be putting out the announcement post just to give some education. It's going to go through, what are the expected behaviors of voting, so people understand what they should be seeing. If they have a proxy, can they override their proxy? What exactly constitutes their vote weights and all that. So that'll be coming out today. We were just giving some time for some last minute touches for the UIs. And also the UIs are going to be adding some improvements over the coming week or two as people start to play with it. But the system's running, the tally is working. We've thrown a bunch of test cases at it. So the hope is it doesn't break, but it will be clearly the beta period to test and see if we can break it or not.
Hey Josh, that information that you're putting out today, which is great, is that going to be hosted on eosvotes.io pursuant to the education portal stuff?
So the problem we've been running into is that eosvotes.io, Steve has been the main UI guy, and he just hasn't had the time to finalize things. So we meant to kind of announce yesterday, the day before, but there was a couple things holding back in terms of creating dynamic paths and hosting a lot of the information there. So it may not be ready today on eosvotes.io, but it'll get on there. He has a chance. He's been in transit a lot lately and moving around doing different speaking gigs and all that.
Thank you.
We're going to give all that information to all the other UIs, and they can host it as well if they want.
It's getting exciting, guys. Great work. Yeah. That was a real community effort. There's a lot of teams involved. So thanks. And it kind of leads on to the next one. So David from EOS 42 put out a proposal as to what should we be voting on by a referendum, or what should be a 1521. David, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, sure, Sharif. Although to give credit where it's due, that was very much Ryan Betham, who's been leading the authoring of the document. Given the time zone he's on, though, he unfortunately can't attend this meeting. But I was going to just run through some potential guiding principles relating to what we believe ought to be deemed criteria for proposals that require a referendum versus those that would typically be voted on by block producers on an ongoing basis, and socialize that and see if we can reach some consensus there. It follows on from Article 8 and the EOS platform user agreement, but the underlying item there is that the community should always ultimately maintain authority over changes that directly influence governance or network economics. Those two, I think, are quite important aspects of that. Some people, of course, may disagree, but governance and network economics, if you think about what they mean, I'll just run through the criteria, as they're not particularly long. And we can talk through what a governing document, or at least our definition of that is, and see if there's any feedback on it. The criteria will be that all new governing documents require a referendum, and that would also therefore consequentially mean changes to an existing governing document require a referendum, and that could be, in theory, anything even as small as changes to underlying code for bug fixes and so forth. And that would mean also that from that point forwards, any proposal for system changes would need to indicate whether or not the said proposal impacted a governing document. Now, what does a governing document actually mean? Well, the Constitution is obviously one very big example we're about to take to referendum as a consequence of it being one. That, as far as we see it, should be, going back to the economic impact too, any proposals, contracts or documents that affect any feature of the EOS economy, and that can include anything that impacts the likes of claim rewards, inflation, buy RAM, RAM fees, EOS.io savings, name fees, and RAM fees. So where our opinion is that anything that impacts something as fundamental as that, we believe the token holders should be the ultimate ones to have a say on that. So that goes back to community sovereignty. It also means any proposal, contract, or document that affects jurisdiction over BPs. So vote producer, changes to reg producer, and the Constitution in some capacity. And any proposal, contract, or document that affects jurisdiction over arbitration and or dispute resolution again. So this is to ensure, obviously, then that we have healthy limits relating to what block producers could vote for in a majority versus the community themselves. And any proposal that impacts voting, of course, is the final one there. So using those criteria, the following have been defined as governing documents: the Constitution, reg producer, vote producer, buy RAM bytes, and claim rewards. It would be good to get feedback from the wider group on that, if they could take a look. I've put the linkers also to our article in this as well, so any feedback on that will be appreciated. But therefore, that also means some examples we just have drawn out that seem to therefore be governing documents. That would include any worker proposal itself, the reg arbitrator one, and I would say the full Rex proposal. So not necessarily the one that I think has already been talked about that could be rolled out immediately, but the one that's fully talking about using all fees and recycling them in a way that is a fundamental change there. We believe probably therefore belongs as a referendum as well. And otherwise, all changes outside of that should be eligible for a 15 out of 21 vote by the block producers. So that is our summary of what we believe ought to be considered for criteria for proposals versus referendum.
So just for clarity, when you say we, who does that mean? What's the corpus of people that is bringing that opinion in?
So it's obviously ourselves, EOS 42. I believe Kevin Rose, who is on the call as well, has been involved in the review of this as well to quite some detail as well. I don't know, Kevin, if you'd like to comment rather than speaking for you.
You summarized it well.
Okay, fine. Yep. So it's definitely been socialised beyond that. I know for a fact that it's been socialised with 3 or 4 other BP groups as well as part of the construction of this. But I'd rather not speak for them and just let anybody come forward who's supportive or otherwise.
And it's not. This isn't the law now or anything. This is just the people trying to do the work to figure out the framework within which we operate.
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering, what about transfers in and out of name bid, transfers in and out of the stake, worker proposal funds? Is that defined in there? Did you have some ideas?
We have worker proposal themselves, so the use for a worker proposal. I think that would probably fit within. That's a very good question, actually. Transfers in and out, whether or not that is defined within a worker proposal referendum itself. Logically, that would need to be defined, right, within that. But very good question.
I think it's any account that consolidates network funds where individual control or ownership of tokens has been surrendered to the network, and that's kind of the idea. I'm sure that there's some exception to that rule, but yeah, any contribution of a network fee or payment for names or RAM or whatever to affect that, transfer it, or alter its state would require a referendum.
Each operation, I'm just thinking of Rex there. If we want to put some funds out of Rex, that goes through referendum, you think? Each time.
I published something a couple weeks ago about why Rex should be a referendum, and in speaking with Bart, who said that upon release, being able to contribute RAM fee and the other account, which is escaping me, might be named, that can be toggled on and off. So Rex in and of itself is a feature of the network which can be tested and deployed by block producers at their discretion, because that's our job. But to affect the additional fees that would come from those 2 accounts classified as network funds or whatever jargon we want to use would require approval of the token holders to do. And that may seem very obvious that of course they would want to do that because it means more return on lending to Rex, but just to establish a precedent moving forward.
It sounds like this is a really good candidate for going into one of these mini votes that Thomas Cox was proposing. We trash it out and then put it through, and if it gets a decent turnout, then that's the way we operate the business.
Sure, yeah, you're misunderstanding what Thomas is saying. It's not about putting a vote up for a 7-day thing and then going with that for the community. They're just trying to advise how they're going to write their drafts. So I don't think it's something we can put up for a 7-day vote and go, okay, we'll use RAM fees, we'll use namespace fees.
No, I wasn't proposing that. I was saying 42 put out a proposal now. How do we ratify that to say, yeah, this is how we're going to run the business? But it doesn't go through a full referendum, which could take 120 days. We need a way to make decisions quicker.
Well, I don't think we need to actually define first what is and what is not referendum. we can, as block producers, start off by saying we need to, we accept referendum choice for adding EOSIO RAM fee and names to the Rex proposal, and you know, it's my personal opinion that that is probably the most likely to pass and the least controversial, the most wanted thing. So it would be a good test to run through the full process after the beta is over, after the 7-day period, yada yada. But after that, we can move to create that framework of what is referendum and what isn't. I don't think it's required first.
Okay.
I'd agree. You can err on the side of caution first. Anything could go up for referendum, even things that don't necessarily need to.
I'd be very careful about that. Can I comment briefly on the 42 statement on what is and isn't referendum? Yeah, when we were writing the Constitution, what I was thinking, and I'm sure I wrote it down somewhere, and I don't know if it ever made it outside of Block.One, is that anything that changes the user experience or changes the behavior of someone's code or changes policy, quote unquote, would need to go through referendum, whereas things that just change how a policy is carried out would not. And so for instance, the code whereby the declared level of RAM was automated to increase 1 byte per block. That was not a referendum item because block producers have discretion over what they declare. And if they want to declare things in an automated instead of a manual way, that's nobody's business but their own. So that was the rationale for that not needing any kind of referendum or community approval. And so this idea of a policy change, or if I have to change the wording of a system contract, Ricardian contract, right? If I had to change the promise or the terms, that would require a referendum. That's a different way of coming after the same ground that was covered by the EOS 42 language, which I thought was very well put together, by the way.
The difficulty there is that the majority of system contracts do not have an associated Ricardian, so there would need to be a referendum to have them put in place in the first place. But also, just keeping in mind is that we want to not create artificial bureaucracy to get in the way of what it is that block producers are essentially voted on and hired to do, which is to maintain, improve, and evolve the network itself. So being able to set that guideline of these are the things that they can do which are genuinely beneficial, but here's the line where beyond that you can see potential abuse is important to draw.
Yeah, I think this is a very timely and very well considered document that you guys are putting together, and I think it's been brilliantly carried forward as far as it has. I look forward to the final form.
Okay, cool. To try and keep the call within the hour, we've got part for Block.One for an AMA session. So I suppose I'll just open the floor. I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions for Block.One to see where we take the discussion goes. Nobody?
Is the AMA for Block.One right now?
Yeah, go.
See, I missed that one. I didn't realize that. I had something lined up.
I'm going to suggest people type their questions in, because compete verbally is going to be unpleasant.
No, I created the AMA. It's an open discussion. Let me put it that way. Does anybody have any questions for Block.One? For me, the community is looking for a view of what a roadmap looks like. Where is the wallet development, etc.
Good questions.
Maybe we can ask Bart what, if he is the only representative of Block.One on the call, what his what the internal opinion at Block.One is of the relationship between Block.One and the EOS Mainnet. How do they view us? A client, a use case? I don't know.
A customer?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Here's what I will say to kind of both those questions. One, I think our internal stance on our relationship to the main network is constantly evolving as the network evolves and as the landscape evolves, as the community evolves. I would say that we are kind of on the cusp of trying to launch some initiatives where we are far more active in going out and farming priorities and opinions and issues from all the stakeholders on the main network, block producers being a big one, but contract developers and just regular users also being strong voices in that room. I think we have not at this point established a very good process for getting the input from those stakeholders into our internal prioritization. And that's going to turn around and also result in some better communication about what proper expectations for where we're going, including a roadmap, including better discussions about details for some of the technologies that are out there and being talked about kind of in a abstract fashion, like REX, like IBC, like BFT. Apparently we'd like to name things with 3-letter acronyms. So I do want to say that about the only thing I can say right now is that it is changing, and in my opinion, it's going to get better in the short term pretty quickly, because I think we are finally getting organizationally to a point where we can really drive an open forum conversation and really include that feedback in the rest of our process. Yeah. Astute listeners will realize that was a dodge. I don't have a roadmap for you today. I don't have a roadmap for the roadmap today. So, and I admit that that's been an ongoing problem. However, I will ask the question right back to you of what needs to be in that roadmap, because internally, roadmap can mean a lot of things to us, whether it's when certain technology features will come online or when we expect certain major changes to Node EOS to happen, when we expect breaking changes or hard forking changes to happen for the network. But externally, and increasingly, we're becoming aware that can also mean when are products that are related to the chain coming out, and what are those products, partially so that the community can be aware and react to it, but I assume also because other people don't necessarily want to be in the uncomfortable position of releasing a competitor right before we announce some sort of product. And I understand those concerns, and I think we are probably pretty close to being able to communicate a product roadmap, a longer term vision of a product roadmap. But again, I don't have a roadmap for that roadmap.
But can I ask, of the dApps that Block.One are either in development or considering, will you be deploying them onto EOS Mainnet?
The answer is it depends. We have some that are we have a lot of irons in the fire, as the expression goes, and I will say that some of them are appropriate for something like the mainnet. Some of them are not appropriate for something like the mainnet. Just from a, the specific domain of the dApp. No commentary on mainnet. It's just that some things are more appropriate in different styles of chains. So it's going to be a little bit of all those things. We obviously have a vested interest in the EOS token through our stake there, so we're conscious of that. But at the same time, we are also a technology provider providing a base level platform that we hope will be used by more than just one network. So we have to keep a broader view about what dApps look like when they're deployed on different styles of chains and different users, different customers of the EOS.io software baseline, of which there's already several chains popping up.
And can I just add, I don't know whether you can answer or not, but the Block.One stake in Mainnet, has there been any thoughts or discussions as to, is that just going to stay there for 10 years, or would there be a desire to have it split into smaller accounts to enable you guys to vote, or is there any discussion or thoughts in this space?
Internally, there's a lot of discussion. Externally, we've made a few statements regarding our intentions for that stake, but they've been relatively few and far between, largely because I don't think internally we've really come to a solid position yet that we feel comfortable saying this represents Block.One. I mean, as you can understand, that's and I think that's what you're alluding to by asking the question. That has a lot of weight in a lot of ways, and so we're trying to be very respectful about exactly how and when we move or do anything with that stake. But I will say that the internal conversations are active, and that's another one of those things that I think you will see in the short term. And again, I'm not going to commit to a date today. You'll start to see more communications pouring out of Block.One regarding that. My hope and my expectation right now from listening to these internal conversations is you will hear that coming out of Block.One well in advance of it actually having any kind of material effect. So we want to start talking about these things. Part of it is just getting all of our ducks in a row so that when we start to talk about it, we have the best interests of the community and ourselves in mind. And part of that is knowing what the best interests of the community in our own mind is. It just takes some time to orchestrate.
Thank you.
I have a question around transparency of priorities for Block.One. Have you guys, so aside from a roadmap, right? I think there's so I understand the roadmap is a much harder thing to pin down because that puts you on the hook for delivery dates and things like that. But what would be helpful is to know that block producers and Block.One are somewhat on the same page as far as overall priorities of addressing certain problems. So because you guys, what you may feel is a priority may not line up with what we think is a priority, and I think coming up with a good way of maintaining that list of priorities and having block producers provide input into that priority stream would be quite helpful for you as a product manager and building that roadmap, and it would be very helpful for us in at least knowing how you categorize a given issue's priority.
I completely agree that we need more transparency in this. A couple of things that I will say on that. One, at the top of this call, we were talking about the RAM market, and someone brought up the question of how are we evaluating, we as the community, so now I'm including myself with the broader group, how are we evaluating the things that are brought up as either criticism or priorities or needs for change on the main network and in the broader community. And it sounds like you are struggling kind of the same thing we're struggling with internally, where creating a system where that's transparent and actually fairly surveys all the stakeholders is difficult. And I think there's probably room for both sides of this to grow. We have similar problems that you would have as far as looking out and trying to discern what the meaningful press is from the bad.
Yeah, we talked about this internally briefly, and we started considering let's say thumbs up in the Git repo, right? So is a good example where someone will propose something saying, we really need to fix X. And then you'll see a bunch of BPs pile into the Git repo and thumbs up that, right? And someone will normally go into the BP Mainnet channel and say, hey guys, please go and give this thing a thumbs up because it gives Block.One some indication that everyone cares about this thing. And so a bunch of people pile in, they give it a thumbs up, right? And that our kind of like hidden hope in the background is that we've somehow communicated a smoke signal to you saying, hey, we really care about this thing, please fix it. You know? And you know, so just like the I'm almost wondering whether something like the referendum tool can't be repurposed as a block producer vote on priority issue, right? Because at the end of the day, when I think about it anyway, and I consider that block producers we are taking payment from the community to run the network, but we also provide value, right? And the more time that we are spending spinning our wheels dealing with like infrastructure issues, right? The less value we're adding back into the ecosystem, because it detracts from the time we're actually adding added value. So we, at the end of the day, that's really what I'm trying to get to is, if as block producers we can communicate to or via some kind of voting mechanism ourselves to say, we really feel that fixing this issue would save us all as a group a lot of time and allow us to add a lot more value back into the ecosystem. That communication cycle is what I think is really important.
And I'm going to throw my weight behind him and say that's a great idea. Having not even a unified, but just a handful of things that are more obvious than thumbs up on GitHub. That's a very noisy channel. It's very hard to discern which thumbs up is from a blocks producer and which is not without, you know, very carefully combing through it. But having something like you just discussed, where you've repurposed the forum tool or something so that there is an easy source of information where it's very easy to tell where the community of block producers' mind is, would very much help us in our own internal prioritization. The efforts that I was referring to before were us trying to put the drive into the community to create things like that. But if it spontaneously happened, then that would be great.
Can I bring up something related to that, to the roadmap and to a collaboration? I know you guys have put out earlier on an EOS.io IP thing, and you know we've been working on the EOS enhancement proposals. And you know in other communities, they have that process where they can put out some ideas, which becomes sort of a roadmap, but collaboratively developed. There's always an owner, right? So perhaps if there was an improvement proposal or an enhancement proposal by Block.One for Rex, there could be discussion, but you know it would be sort of a shared document. I think that would really help, and I'm also thinking of other issues that are not 100% defined. For example, right now, a currency is a little bit fuzzy. It's not very well defined. Like a transfer should transfer a balance from two accounts in the account table to be deemed a currency. There's some things that are not absolutely precise that we could precise in enhancement proposals, right? So we have an EEP20 of some sort because it's not fully defined. But we're seeing issues with adoption coming from a single block producer, right? It doesn't, or a few block producers. It'd be a lot better that these things are hosted by Block.One, but still open for collaboration, right? I think that would be very helpful. What do you think of that?
I actually kind of disagree with you a little bit as to whether or not that would be good in the long run. In the short term, I think something like that is totally enabling. But you know, if you're having trouble getting adoption in a like a broader community of different voices, then that's an issue. And trying to cheat that, so to speak, by using the implicit trust or by expecting Block.One to be a neutral party or somehow better at rallying the troops. We have a you know a large portion of the current development into the code base, but if you're really talking about you know a more decentralized community effort to keep this technology or these chains up and running, then there's not really room for like a dominant a dominant dictator. That should kind of rotate in and out. That should be a community effort. So in the short term, we could entertain.
I'm not talking about the
in the long
dictator.
term.
It's just that people right now, this ecosystem of proposals is just very scattered. There's like 5 or 6 initiatives to do just that, right? Sort of an RFC system for EOS. So it's not about gating the proposals themselves or being only you that do proposals. It's about finding a spot, which is not a single block producer's GitHub account, and that people will say, okay, I'm going to contribute there because it is a neutral party.
Sounds like we need a worker proposal system. Does anybody else have any questions for Bart? I know Thomas had one in the chat. So Thomas, I think he was probably wondering what he was doing in Block.One for nearly a year. Bart, he wants to know, is EOS a blockchain?
I'm going to treat that like a joke and not pay it any attention.
I'm hurt, Bart. This is like the first question I've had a chance to ask you in months, and you just like treat me as a joke. I'm sad.
I do apologize, Thomas. I don't mean to imply that you were a joke, but I think topical relevance, that has to be treated like a joke.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's move on.
Is there anybody else that wants to raise something while we're still here? Or
do we want to talk about what's being chatted about in BP Mainnet right now?
Before we get into that, I just wanted to raise a few things about the referendum that didn't come up. There are just a few issues that we've highlighted in the ballot craft group that the top 21 are basically going to need to come to consensus on. And we don't have time to go over these issues. I just wanted to raise them, get people thinking about them. So the first one is just how we interpret the 10%, whether it's 10% more yes than no, like just the yes votes divided by the no votes, or there's another way to calculate that number. So I think we need some consensus on this before referendums start rolling in, because there's a kind of a gray zone where it'll be 10% by one interpretation and less than 10 by another. The other thing we've highlighted is competing proposals. So just 2 proposals by 2 different producers that they're mutually exclusive and they come in at a different time with a different amount of votes. So the top 21 is going to have to kind of just start thinking about how they're going to deal with it. It'd be really awesome if they could come out with some guidelines and just say, this is how we're going to deal with this situation. Those are the 2 main things. And there's a few other things that I think should be discussed. Just having consensus before the referendums roll in versus afterwards, because it could be pretty ugly when we go into the Wild West stage if we haven't thought about it and we haven't come out with guidelines saying, in this situation we'll do one thing, in this situation we'll do another. It'll be a lot worse if we're starting to bicker about that after a referendum's been validated for 28 days. So I just wanted to just raise that before we moved on to another topic.
Can I ask Thomas, because I know you've written about the 10% thing in the past, and I know you have a very good, strong opinion about competing proposals. Can I ask you to maybe draft up an article about those 2 things so that it could be shared amongst the people who we'd like to reach that consensus? Maybe Thomas has left the call already.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question clearly.
Sorry, yeah, Haley was just asking about the issue that may arise of if there's competing proposals that go to referendum and how to deal with that. I know you've spoken about that quite a bit. And he was asking for clarification on the 10% more yes than no and how there could be different interpretations of that. And I know you've spoken and written about both.
Yeah. If I'm going to be a lazy bum and say, would you please PM me on Telegram and ask that question in writing? Because I'm going to go back to sleep here at the end of this call.
Okay, no problem. I will do that.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, if anybody doesn't have anything pressing, I'll end the call. Give back some time.
If anyone is interested in participating in the discussion regarding a top 21 block producer operating more than one node, registered as a producer candidate, please join the mainnet channel to discuss.
Right.
Thanks, Kevin. You will do.
One other thing we spoke about last week, but we put off because of the white block reports, is using wrap instead of blacklist. And it seemed like there was overwhelming support to use wrap, but everyone was like, oh, this is not the right time. We're a week later. Do we want to continue waiting? We don't have to decide this right now, but it should be something that's brought back up.
So should we schedule a call again for next week?
In the meantime, just regarding that specifically, there's nothing stopping anybody from proposing a wrap approval transaction to do whatever it is that ECAF were to be asking people to do, and then people can sign it or not. And just before we get back for a meeting, just do something, and people will either do it or not do it, and then we can discuss it later.
Okay, cool. Bart, thanks for joining from Block.One, and Thomas from the Alliance. It's great to have you guys on the call. And I'll end it here, and I'll post out the recording later on so people can post it to their channels. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Well done.
Thank you.
See you.